Ancient sacrificial rituals involve the offering of rams and bullocks. But what's truly fascinating is how modern spirituality has completely transformed our understanding of sacrifice from external acts to internal transformation.
That's such an interesting perspective. How did we get from literal animal offerings to this deeply personal interpretation?
Well, looking at historical texts, especially Leviticus chapter 5, we can trace this evolution back to the 11th century BCE. The fascinating thing is how these ancient instructions about sacrifice were already hinting at something more internal. This idea of circumcising the foreskins of our hearts was revolutionary for its time.
The way this connects to the Catholic concept of the victim's soul is pretty remarkable, isn't it?
Exactly. And what's really compelling is how this concept has expanded beyond its original context into what's now called the ihidayah, meaning oneness, in ancient Aramaic. Instead of the traditional path of withdrawing from society, these modern spiritual seekers are choosing to stay right in the midst of what they call the filth of civilization.
Hmm. That seems almost counterintuitive to what most people think of as spiritual practice.
You know what's fascinating about that? The text actually suggests that running away to a cave would be the opposite of true repentance. It would just feed into spiritual pride. Instead, this modern interpretation calls for creating what you might call a monastery without walls, right in the middle of everyday life.
So, how does this translate into practical spiritual practice in today's world?
Well, instead of burnt offerings and traditional sacrifices, it's about offering up something much more challenging our authentic selves. The text specifically says, God takes no delight in burnt offerings, but rather desires a broken spirit, a broken and humbled heart. It's about maintaining spiritual awareness while being fully engaged with the world around us.
That's exactly what makes this so relevant to modern life. It's about finding sacred space in the ordinary.
And you know what's particularly powerful about this approach? It democratizes spiritual practice. You don't need to join a monastery or become a religious professional. The entire world becomes your monastery. And here's the key part, it requires constant, moment by moment choices to remain present and engaged.
The daily practice aspect really brings it home. It's not about grand gestures, but consistent choices.
Right? And this connects beautifully to the original concept of the reparation offering. Instead of offering physical sacrifices, we're offering something much more precious, our willingness to remain vulnerable and authentic in a world that often encourages us to do the opposite. It's about transforming our understanding of what it means to make an offering.
Well, that certainly puts a new spin on the whole concept of sacrifice.
And here's what I find most revolutionary about this whole approach. It suggests that true spiritual growth often requires us to stay right where we are, facing our challenges head on. The text talks about rebuilding the walls of our hearts, not as barriers, but as foundations that allow us to remain open while maintaining our integrity.
Looking toward the future, how do you see this understanding of spirituality evolving?
I think we're going to see more emphasis on this idea of integrated spirituality, where the sacred and secular aren't separated but intertwined. It's not about escaping the world anymore, but about transforming how we engage with it. As our world becomes increasingly complex and interconnected, this ancient wisdom about internal transformation becomes more relevant than ever.